Welcome back to Tech Tuesdays. Last week, we looked at the basics of a soundboard, how to set it up, and some of the functions. This week, we'll be diving deeper into the soundboard, including how you can set up audio to be sent to a live stream. Let's get into it. We'll start with a quick recap of what we covered last time. This is an analog mixing console. Here are your inputs, and here are your outputs. These are called faders. They control the volume of each of the channels. These are the main faders. They control the volume of your main left-right output. Quick aside here, if you're looking for a way to upgrade your setup and you're still using an analog board, you should look at upgrading your board. Digital mixing boards offer much more versatility and ease of use over an analog board. Let's look at the other dials and buttons. On the top row, we have the button for phantom power. Phantom power is required for some microphones like condenser mics, but not required for most dynamic mics and ribbon mics. Let's take this opportunity to talk about some of the different types of microphones. Dynamic mics are the most common type of mics. They can handle a high sound pressure level, or SPL, so they are commonly used for louder instruments like drums. Sound pressure level is the maximum level of volume the mic can take before distorting. Dynamic mics are also used for vocals, like the classic Shure SM58, or the cheaper alternative, the Behringer XM8500. Condenser microphones come in two varieties, large diaphragm condensers and small diaphragm condensers. Both types require 48-volt phantom power supplied to their channel to work. Large condensers are very sensitive mics, so they are useful for quiet sources or sources that have a large dynamic range. They offer a deep, rich sound for voice, which makes them great for recording voice in a studio setting. Small condensers are very similar to large condensers, but they have a better response in the higher frequencies. They are great mics for recording acoustic instruments. They're commonly used to record orchestras or other large ensembles. Ribbon microphones are some of the oldest types of microphones. As the name suggests, they use a thin ribbon of conductive material to record sound. They produce a very warm and rich sound, which takes the edge off of harsher sounds like guitar amps and brass. It's very important to never supply phantom power to a ribbon microphone, because it could electrocute the ribbon and cause it to break. Let's look back at the board. Under the phantom power button, we have the pad buttons. These reduce the gain of the channel by a specified amount, typically minus 20 dB. This is useful for when the input source is very loud coming into the board. Next, we have the gain knobs. As we found out last week, these are used to set the input volume of each channel. Remember to set these to a level that allows the faders to be set to around 0 to give you fine control over the channels with the faders. Under the gain dials, we have the high-pass filter buttons. These remove low frequencies from the sound. The next chunk of dials are your EQ dials. EQ stands for equalization. These dials are used to boost or reduce the volume of certain frequencies. For example, this board has 6 EQ dials, which has 4 bands of EQ. The first band is your high frequency dial. The last dial in the set is the lows. The middle 4 dials are used to control 2 bands of sweeping EQ. The top dial in each pair controls the frequency of the EQ, which can be adjusted within a set range of frequencies. And the bottom dial of each pair is used to adjust how much boost or cut to apply to that channel. You may need to use the EQ dials to remove frequencies that could be causing feedback. Feedback is when a sound is being fed back into the system and amplified over and over, causing it to produce a loud squeal or hum. To find out which frequencies are causing feedback, try slowly boosting the gain on one of the sweeping bands and sweeping back and forth through the frequencies. If the frequency gets worse, reduce the gain on that band to remove the problem frequencies. You can also use the EQ to tune the sound to a clearer sound by playing around with it until you're happy with the result. To apply the EQ to the channel, you need to press the button down below the EQ dials in that channel The next set of dials is your auxiliary gain dials. These control the volume of each channel on the other outputs, similar to how the faders control the volume of each channel on the main speakers. The bottom two sets of aux dials have buttons to select whether the channels are pre or post fader. In most cases, you want the aux sends to be pre-fader because they'll need to be controlled separately from the fader. Under that row of dials, we have the pan dials. These adjust the channel's output to the left or right of a stereo output. This can be useful to create a stereo image of the sound. For example, if the source for two of the channels is left and right stereo audio from a computer's audio or a phone playing audio into the system. Finally, we have the mute button. On some boards, this is an on button which needs to be pressed for the channel to be active. On this board, though, it's a mute button which mutes the channel when pressed. In our first episode, we looked at how to set up the channels to feed out to our main speakers. Now let's look at how to set up an auxiliary send to feed audio into a live stream. It's pretty simple to set up auxiliary sends on an analog board. Let's pick our output on the board. Here are the outputs. Let's choose aux channel 1. To make it simple, we'll just do a mono output for this setup, but you could use two channels to make a stereo mix if desired. Now that we've plugged our cable into the board, we need to set our channels. Let's imagine that we have 4 inputs that need to send to our output. A pulpit mic, a singer's mic, a guitar, and a keyboard. We'll plug these instruments into channels 1 through 4. Now we need to set the volume levels for those channels. In a real scenario, you'll want to set the levels by doing a sound check with the performers. I'll set all of the auxiliary gain dials for our 4 inputs to 0. Then we'll need to set the master dial for that auxiliary output to an appropriate volume. The dials here on the side work similarly to the main faders, except that they control the aux outputs. Now we should have audio coming out of aux 1 from our 4 inputs. How do we get the output audio into our computer to record or to add to a live stream? We'll explore that next week when we look at live streaming setups. Thank you for watching this week's Tech Tuesday. I hope that you've learned something new and that the skills you're learning here can go to help your core worship ministry. Hope to see you next week.